Hey, welcome to Wonderful Works Talks, where we talk all about the disability ministry mission of helping churches become accessible for all. I'm your host, Barb Stanley, and today we're going to talk about something really important when it comes to reaching kids for Christ, and that is how to really engage kids in the church classroom in ways that are fun, memorable, and reduce behaviors. But before we get to that, I want you to stop and ask yourself a question. It has been said that we get more of whatever it is that we focus on. Do you think that's true when it comes to working with kids? And if so, what does that mean to their future? Well, we're going to hear from a man whose ministry has been impacted by this very question, the Kidologist himself, Karl Bastian. Karl is the founder of Kidology.org, which is a nonprofit ministry that coaches, equips, trains, and encourages children's ministry leaders all around the world. And he's also the children's pastor at High Point Church. Karl, thank you so much for being here today.
I'm so honored to join you. Thank you.
Well, I am a big fan of the work you do and all of the great ideas you have with engaging kids in the classroom. We think that is so important, especially when we're talking about reaching kids with all different learning styles. Can you tell us a little bit about your story and what kind of inspired you to do this?
I'm a kid that never grew up. I often get called a big kid. Sometimes when I get into discussing philosophy of ministry and teaching strategies, one of the things I hear the most often from adults who see me in costumes on Sunday and they see the unicycling and the juggling, they'll say, "I didn't know you were such a serious person," because they see that fun side and they don't realize is that I often will joke that I'm dead serious about fun.
Yeah.
I'm not fun or silly just because I'm a clown. I'm fun for a very serious reason. And
hmm
yes, I have a lighthearted personality and I love to enjoy life and I love children and I love the world of kids. But when it comes to my ministry, it's also very strategic. But one of the things I think that's unique about me, and I'll just tell you a quick story.
Oh,
But when I
yeah,
was
good.
a young boy, I was at church one day and I was exclaiming about what a great Saturday I had. Now, the irony of the story is I don't remember what I did on that Saturday, but maybe I went to the park, maybe I had a birthday party. But I was telling someone about this great Saturday, and I made the comment, I will never forget yesterday. So it's ironic that I have now forgotten it, but I'm in my 50s. But this nice older gentleman, and he did not mean to say anything mean or harmful. I'm sure he was just being friendly, but he just made an off the cuff comment. He just said, "Oh, you won't remember yesterday." And I said, "What do you mean?" And I was taken aback, and he said, "Well, you're a kid. You won't remember your childhood."
Hmm.
And I was devastated by his comment. And I went home that day, and my mom, who's very insightful, and I get a lot of my kidology, the study of kids, from her. She could sense there was something wrong with me, and so she asked what was wrong. And I asked her. I said, "A man told me I will forget my childhood. Is that true?"
Mhm.
And I said, "Because what's the point of being a kid if I'm not going to remember it?" And she said, "Well, Karl, some adults don't remember their childhood,
Mhm.
and that may be true for him because a lot of adults don't have a memorable childhood or
Mhm.
they've chosen not to remember it." And she said, "But that is optional. And you will remember your childhood because you have a great childhood." And she said, "You can also choose to remember your childhood." Well, I started journaling that week,
Mhm.
and I journaled every day for my entire childhood. I got really analytical about it. I would rate every day from 1 to 10. I would average the months. I would graph them. I did that all the way until I became pen pals with a missionary kid in the Philippines who's now my wife. So she killed my journaling. But I know so many stories from my childhood. I remember taking what I called mental photos of events. So when I'm teaching now, I tell so many stories from my childhood, funny stories, embarrassing stories. And I do have people say, "How do you remember all that?" And I actually thank that fellow because I say, I was told I wouldn't remember my childhood. So I made an intentional effort to remember my childhood, to be observant of it. So I'm probably a little odd or even extreme in how much I remember of my childhood. But I think God also used that to give me a perspective into children, how they experience life, because I kind of literally became a student of childhood with my own life being the laboratory.
I love that because that is one thing that we really noticed looking at your stuff on kidology.org is you do seem to get it, like what it feels like to be a child. Because I do think a lot of us do forget, as we become adults. And I do remember a lot of my childhood, and I remember I had a really, really hard time sitting still and
Hmm.
listening when someone was teaching without having we didn't have fidgets back then, but without something to do with my hands or
Yep.
being interactive. And it was really difficult. And I think what you're teaching with the gospel is so important that children get it, that the fact that you are really being intentional about giving it in a way that all different types of kids can engage in it.
Yeah, but I was a fidgeter. I always carried toys with me, and I joke now that many of the things I got in trouble for, I do now as a children's pastor. I would
Right?
take my
Yeah.
toys to church, and they would take my toys away. I
Yeah.
would be acting out the Bible story, and they'd say that's disrespectful or insubordinate. And now I have a whole website called toyboxtales.com where I make
Mhm.
Bible stories with action figures.
Mhm.
I would change the lyrics to songs. We'd be supposed to sing Jesus loves all the children of the world, and I'd be singing Jesus loves all the chickens of the world,
Uh-huh.
and I would get in trouble and get a timeout. Now my puppet Gus, who the kids all love, I've
Mhm.
been Gus for over 20 years. He's on my podcast and on pastorcarl.com.
Uh-huh.
And but now my puppet he's like my alter ego. He does a lot of things I got in trouble for
Uh-huh.
doing. So a lot of it was I was a mini kids pastor, but kids pastors didn't exist,
Mhm.
when I was a child. So now we can look at a kid and go, I see what they're going to be someday.
Mhm.
But what I was going to be someday didn't exist.
Mhm.
And so my dad was a pastor. I assumed maybe I'd be a pastor, but honestly, I didn't want to do what my dad did. I mean, I
Yeah.
love pastors. I love what my dad did, but I saw the grown-upness of what he did, the preaching, leading board meetings, and dealing with deacons and finances. And I didn't want to do that. I
Right.
wanted to play with toys and do puppets and
Right.
magic tricks, and that's what I do now. But
Yeah.
that exists. There wasn't even a degree in children's ministry.
Mhm.
I created my own master's program in college, in seminary,
Mhm.
and I joke I graduated as valedictorian with the lowest GPA because I was the only student, the only master's in children's ministry at Trinity University because I helped design the program. So anyway, I'll let you go because I'll just keep talking.
So when I hear you talk about your childhood, I can still feel the joy that you had all the way back then. It still exudes out. And my question is, when you're talking about the things that you really felt like you were made for didn't exist back then, which I know is true because I'm just a little bit younger than you are, and there was no children's pastor when I was growing up either. Like that was not a thing in my town, at least. What was that like trying to figure out where you wanted to go in the future? And did you get people who were really encouraging you to kind of stay in that joy and
I
exuberance
love
or
this
not?
question because my childhood memory is very joyful,
Hmm.
but it was not all joy.
Yeah.
I was the kid that was always in trouble,
Hmm.
who didn't fit in,
Hmm.
who got pulled out all the time. But
Hmm.
the secret to my joy was my mother. I didn't fit any molds, and I exasperated my poor mother. But I remember my mom so many times literally grabbing my face, and I know we're just audio, so you just have to picture
Yeah.
this, but she would literally grab my face just so she could look me in the eye and hold me still, not harshly, gently, but just hold the sides of my face and look me in the eyes, and she would say, "Sorry, forgive my emotion," because she's with the Lord. But she would say, "Carl, whenever you figure out what God made you for, and you get all this energy and creativity and passion focused in one direction, watch out, world."
Mm.
To everyone else, I was a screw up,
Mhm.
but to my mom, she didn't have me figured out either.
Mhm.
But all she knew is there was nothing wrong with me.
Mhm.
All she knew was that God had wired a very unique child and that somehow someday it was all going to go in one direction.
Mhm.
And once I figured that out, and that's all I knew was that I'm okay. There's nothing wrong with me.
Mhm.
I just don't know yet what I'm supposed to do.
Mhm.
And so in the meantime, I just have to be patient. And that means I'm going to get in trouble. I'm
Mhm.
gonna have to sit in the corner. I'm gonna end up in after-school detentions. I'm gonna end up in the principal's office. People aren't gonna get me, but that's not my fault, and it's not even their fault, she would say. She would talk to me more about forgiving others than forgiving myself, because
Mhm.
they just don't get you, but that's okay, because you don't get you.
Mhm.
And she'd even say, "And I don't even get you sometimes,
Mhm.
but God gets you,
Mhm.
and God has a plan that only you can fulfill." And until you figure that out, it's like God has packed all this energy, and she called it unbridled energy, into a package, and it doesn't fit in you yet. Your
Mhm.
body's too small, your brain's too small, your heart's too small, so it's leaking out. And when it leaks out, you get in trouble because people don't know how to handle the leaks. And she said, and it wasn't a license to be bad. It wasn't a license. I still had to obey. So my mom had signals. One of her signals was two taps.
Mhm.
And so sometimes I'd get two taps on the leg, and I knew dial it in or whatever. And she had an ear tug, which was a signal she could do across a room, and so we were a team. One of the things um, that my mom used to always say to a child other than me was, it's not me against you, it's you and me against the discipline, or you and me against this issue. So we were a team
Mhm.
working with my behavior, you
Mhm.
know? So I just saw her as a teammate in
Mhm.
figuring out who I was. Now, my mom passed away from cancer in 1996, 1 year before I started Kidology,
Mhm.
published my first book.
Mhm.
And Kidology is the study of kids,
Mhm.
how to understand them, relate to them, communicate to them within the context of their world and their perspective. That's
Mhm.
why I coined that
Mhm.
term, because if we want to minister to kids, that's how we have to minister. We have to start with them.
Right.
Not we have to drop our agenda, and
Mhm.
we have to start with how will they best learn. And I didn't have child psychology degree. I didn't have, like, I'm not, I always say I'm not an expert.
Mhm.
In a lot of my workshops, you'll hear me say, I don't call myself the kidologist because I'm an expert.
Mhm.
I call myself the kidologist because I'm constantly learning. And
Mhm.
the whole reason I started Kidology, is because when I was a rookie kids pastor, I was in the inner city of Chicago. I was dealing with like 100 kids by myself, and I had no discipline problems because my teaching was capturing their attention for an hour.
Yes.
But I thought that was normal.
Mhm.
I had no idea that my teaching was different or strange or I was just doing what I do. So what happened is people started coming to observe me. I had adults in the back
Right.
of the with clipboards. There was no internet. And then I started getting interviews, and
Mhm.
people wanted to know my teaching strategy, my philosophy of, and I was like, just watch me. I don't know what I'm doing.
Mhm.
So it was a lady named Ardith Ward. She was just a lady at our church doing an article for the church newspaper, nothing
Mhm.
fancy,
Mhm.
nothing glamorous or anything. And she was the one that helped me understand myself,
Mhm.
because as she heard my story, which I haven't even told you that part of it, of how I got into ministry, she was the one that said to me, the reason you're so effective is you started in ministry as a 10-year-old.
Right.
And you were using your world, your
Mhm.
your stories, your toys, your
Mhm.
props. And so she basically said, "You're not repeating that." And so that's when I started using a kids crew, started
Mhm.
having kids be my team. So I started a kids crew, and then I was running my children's church with me and a bunch of fourth and fifth graders. It's what gave birth to Kidology, is the study of kids, because
Right.
she's you need to train adults how to teach and minister the way you are, with the focus on kids, their world, and how they learn.
You just said so many really important things there. So we're going to stop. We're going to unpack it a little bit because I do not want people to miss some of the things that you said. First, I want to kind of go back to your mom.
Okay.
Um, what difference do you think that made in your life that she saw the best in you and teamed with you? And that was her focus. Because it sounds like it was hard other places you weren't always understood or accepted for your behavior. So what difference do you think that made, having that one person who is speaking life into you?
Oh, it made every difference in the world,
Mhm.
because she helped me understand that that there was nothing wrong with me. that
Mhm.
I was made in the image of God. I was made with a purpose. Jeremiah 29:11. I
Mhm.
know the plans I have for you. In the Hebrew, it's literally, I know the thoughts I think about you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you, not to harm you, plans to give you hope in the future. She built that, she just drilled that into me. And even her humility to say, I don't know what that plan is.
Mhm.
I don't always understand how God made you, but God does. Another verse that's misused that my mom explained to me, parents often get discouraged by, and I forget the reference, but everyone knows it, train up a child in the way he should
Right.
go, and
Oh,
when he
yeah.
grows
Yeah.
up, he will not depart.
Yeah.
Parents think that's a promise that if you do a good job, your kid will turn out, and follow Jesus. That's
Right.
has nothing to do with that,
Right.
because every child has their own free will. You
Right.
could be a perfect parent, which no one is, and your
Mhm.
child could reject Christ and
Right.
go become whatever. In the Hebrew, that verse says, "Train up a child according to his bent,
Mm.
and when he grows up, he will not depart from his
Yeah.
bent."
Oh, I
So
love that.
the silly example I use is the lawyer dad who wants his kid to be a lawyer, but
Mhm.
his kid's got artistic abilities and he wants to be a painter and a poet. He
Right.
can make him be a lawyer, make him go to law school, give him
Right.
an associate partnership in the law firm. The kid's going to eventually quit and go be an artist because that's his bent. So our job as a parent or a teacher or a pastor is to study our child or our students and say, what is their bent?
Mhm.
And raise them according to their bent. So my mom was going, okay, who is this crazy kid?
Mhm.
So if he likes puppets, I'm going to buy him a puppet. If they like art, I had a little girl one time who kept getting in trouble for coloring on the bulletins, and I was like, I went out and bought her a thing with 24 colored pencils and a sketch pad,
Mhm.
and gave it to her. And her mom came to me later and said, I can't believe the things she's drawing. I
Mhm.
was always taking away her drawings because she would draw on inappropriate things.
Mhm.
And I didn't want to be mean to the mom, but I was kind of like, hello?
Yeah.
Like, this is what you should have been doing, is encouraging her artwork.
Yeah.
So that's our job, and that's what my mom was doing, but it made the world of difference that she was saying, "Don't listen to the negative messages of the world.
Mhm.
Be gracious to them,
Yeah.
because they just don't understand you, but God does."
Yeah. And I want to stop here real quick because there's going to be a lot of ministry leaders that are listening to this, a lot of children's directors, and not every child has that kind of mom or dad. Not
Mhm.
every child has those voices at home that are telling them, you are okay exactly the way you are. I see you for who God made you, and I'm going to celebrate with you. But any adult that's in their life on a regular basis has the opportunity to speak that life. So if you're a ministry leader, you can do that for that child.
We can do this, and you know what? I'll give you one quick story. I was at camp several years ago, and there was a boy who got beat up by his whole cabin.
Mhm.
And so the lady who ran the camp, she's with the Lord now. Her name was Mary Kay Meeker, like my mother, just a genius with children. And so she was going to meet with the whole cabin and this boy. And I asked if, as the camp speaker, I said, "Can I be a part of that?" And I didn't tell her. I just wanted to observe her. I wanted to learn. That's the kidologist. I just wanted to learn from the master. And I went in there, and what came out is that this boy, he would mock every boy in the cabin, but they all loved it. Like
Mhm.
he could impersonate them. He could
Yeah.
impersonate their voice, their manner, and they all thought it was funny.
Yeah.
Except when they were the target, but
Yeah.
they liked it when he did everyone else in the cabin. But on the last night of the camp, there was a boy with special needs who had spoke funny, and when he started to do that boy, they didn't want that boy to be hurt, so they all jumped him,
Yeah.
and they beat him up. And so he kinda, uh they were doing it to defend this boy who they didn't want
Yeah.
to be hurt, but their
Right.
own personal hurt came out, so he kinda deserved it. So they all had to shake hands and apologize, and he apologized, and then all those boys left, and so it kind of ended. But this boy was crushed, because it all kind of turned on him. Well, they give me a golf cart at camp to drive around this big camp, and I said, can I drive him back to his cabin, and just kind of talk to him? And typically I don't like to be alone with the kid, but I just thought in this situation, it's a well-populated camp, there's lots of people around. I just asked for an exception, and the camp director said, yeah, you can give him a ride back to his cabin. So we drove back to the cabin, and I could just see him deflated. So I started on his side. I said, wow, that was pretty rough. You got beat up. And he said, yeah. And I said, that didn't really go the way you thought it was going to go. And he said, no. And so we got in front of the cabin and I said, I got out a piece of paper and I said, can I have your autograph? And he was taken back and he said, why? I said, just give me, I want your autograph. So he gave me his autograph and I saved it. I still have it to this day. And I said, you know, I don't want you to think that because of what happened tonight, that there's something wrong with you. I said, have you ever heard of Mark Lowry? And he goes, yeah, he's my favorite comedian. And I said, Mark Lowry's a guy,
I
he's
don't.
kind of like the John Crist of 10 years ago.
Okay.
And I said, he's a guy that can take a whole room of people, have them laughing, and then he can turn the corner, bring up a point, and have the whole room crying. He's a master communicator.
Hmm.
I said, you're able to look at someone and you're able to become them, their
Hmm.
mannerisms, their voice. You can analyze their personality. I said, that is an incredible skill. I said, you're a genius. You understand character, you understand voice, you understand personality. You're probably the smartest kid in that cabin. And I said, I think you've got an amazing future. And I can see you on stage in front of a room with 5,000 people on it, that have them eating out of your hand. And I said, tonight, all you did was misuse the gifts God gave you.
Hmm.
And I said, or this week, you misused the gifts God gave you. And I said, I want your autograph because I'm going to be watching. And someday I'm going to see your name in lights and I'm going to buy tickets and I'm going to be in the front row and I'm going to pull out that autograph and I'm going to show you that I knew you when you were 10 years old. This boy starts crying.
Mm.
Do you really think that could be me? I said, I know that could be you. I said, I'm not saying that's your future, but I said, I want you to know when you go to bed tonight that even though you got a beating, there's nothing wrong with you. And God's given you incredible gifts. And I told him what I heard. The reason I'm crying is because this is what my mom was always telling me.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that kid. And I want leaders that hear this to
Yes.
understand that one 10-minute conversation can change the entire direction of that kid's life.
Mhm.
Because one leader said to him, there's nothing wrong with you, and I believe in you. So we have such power to
Yes.
speak future. If you know the book The Blessing, I forget the author, but one of the points is speaking a positive future onto a child. And that's one of the ways we speak blessing to children.
Wow. That is just beautiful, and it's so true. You never know when a conversation you have with someone is going to be a difference maker for good or for bad on what happens next and how they see themselves. That is so powerful.
I'll tell you, one of the upsides of dying of cancer is it's a slow death.
Hmm.
My mom was dying for a year. We got letters in the mail from all over the world, and we there were so many we couldn't even read them all. We were just dealing with our own grief, so they all went in a box. And then after my mom passed, we started to go through them, and I can't tell you how many of those letters people talked about 5-minute encounters with my mom
Yeah.
in a lobby after church. And they constantly said that she was the type of person that after 5 minutes they were pouring out their life to her,
Hmm.
and how they changed the direction of her life by speaking a positive future to
Hmm.
them. And they would say, I'm now in the ministry, I'm now on the mission field, I'm now teaching, because my parents said I could never do it, my family said I could never do it, but you told me I could. So
Hmm.
never think like I'm just a teacher. I'm just,
Right.
I only see them once a week.
Hmm.
You have incredible power of encouragement to the people that God puts into your sphere of influence.
Absolutely. And one thing I am hearing about your mom and I see in you is someone who puts people at ease right away. How important is that for teachers and ministry leaders who are listening to know that their demeanor, the way they interact with the kids, and actually really focusing on each child's strength instead of the negative? How does that impact the rest of their teaching time?
Oh, it's huge. I'll tell you one of my favorite verses, and I wish I could give you the reference right away, but it's so out of context. I use it in all my discipline workshops. I have it memorized though, so you can Bible Gateway it. When I smiled at them, they scarcely believed it. The light of my face was precious to them.
Mm.
I use that verse out of context because the kids that have special needs or behavioral issues, they are used to adults being annoyed at them,
Mhm.
bothered at them. They've
Yes.
seen the eye rolls when they enter the room, like, oh, look who's here today. They've seen their, oh, Billy showed up.
Yeah.
And when you actually are delighted that they're there,
Mhm.
that the smile on your face and the joy that you have, it disarms them. In
Mhm.
fact, sometimes it's almost like the experience foster parents have where the kids will get worse before they get better because they're testing the love. Like they'll actually break things. If you're familiar with dealing with troubled kids, they will test your love. They'll actually try to get you to reject them
Mhm.
because they can't believe you actually will love them unconditionally. And it's almost like you have to show them just how much you love and accept them. And
Mhm.
once they're convinced of your love, you get an irreparable, unbreakable bond with them
Mhm.
because they now know you love them. And there's so many ways to do it. I do it through nicknames. Like I remember years ago, I was at an event where I was just hired in to do a magic show,
Mhm.
and there was a little boy. He had a New Orleans Saints hat on, and I nicknamed him right away the Saint because I could tell by his behavior he was not a saint. And so I just started calling him Saint, partly because I couldn't pronounce his real name. And I saw the adults roll their eyes when I called him Saint.
Mhm.
And well, he acted like a saint for me.
Yeah.
Oh, because
Yeah.
I labeled him a
Right.
saint.
Yep.
Kids live up to your expectations of them.
Mhm.
And so it's just winning them over. It's redefining. My mom used to redefine all negative traits as positive traits.
Mhm.
No, if a kid, someone said they were nosy, she'd say, no, they're inquisitive.
Yeah.
Oh, if they're stubborn, no, they have conviction.
Mhm.
So any negative trait you can flip to a positive trait.
Mhm.
They might be doing it at the inappropriate time
Mhm.
or in the inappropriate manner, but you can teach that.
Right.
Say, I love that you're so inquisitive, but you really should not go into a woman's purse. That's her
Yeah.
private place.
Yeah.
But I love that you're so curious. That's going to take you far in life.
Yeah.
So you're not telling a kid they're nosy.
Mhm.
No. And so you can always read it. And kids are they gravitate toward you
Mhm.
because you're the one that's seeing the positive in them.
Mhm. So true. And I think even taking that one step further, you can use the positive in a constructive way, even in the class. So if you have a kid who can't sit still, maybe they're the one to lead the dance at the beginning. I mean, I think too often we see kids that may seem challenging and we just try to dampen them down so that they're not causing a problem instead of using them for their abilities.
Yeah,
Be.
I remember once my mom, she was like the superintendent of our Sunday school when I was
Mhm.
in high school. And I remember a boy being sent to her, and she said, "Oh, well, why were you sent to me?" Because all the disciplined kids were sent to my mom. And he just said, "Well, I'm ADHD." So he knew that was a label
Yeah.
that in his mind was defined as bad kid.
Mhm.
So I remember her just so masterfully saying, "Well, since you're ADHD, you obviously know more about that than I do." So she said, "So you could help me understand what that means." And she said, "Does that mean that you figure things out faster than the other kids? And so while they're still trying to figure it out, you're ready to move on to the next topic?" And he was like, "Yeah." And she said,
Yeah.
"And does that mean that you don't like to sit still? You'd rather get up and do something than sit in a chair all day?" Yeah, and she just I could go on and
Yeah.
on, but she kept listing all these positive traits, and
Mhm.
you could almost see his chest swelling
Mm.
where he would be like, "I'm ADHD." Like,
Mhm.
she redefined it in his mind as 10 positive traits, and
Right.
then she said, "All right, well, here's what we're gonna do, but you can't tell your teacher or I'll get in big trouble, but I'm gonna appoint you as the teacher's assistant." But you
Mhm.
can't tell her. This is like you're a secret agent. So when she starts to pass out papers, I want you to jump up out of that chair and say, "I'll pass those out, Mrs. Johnson." And she just gave him
Mhm.
positive thing because what teacher's going to say, "No, you can't help pass out papers?"
Right.
So she redefined
Mhm.
his ADHD. And then she often would say, "I think Carl was ADHD when he was a little boy. We
Uh-huh.
just didn't have letters like they do now."
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
her way of saying we didn't used to label kids the way we do today.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. But man, when you label them as something really powerful and positive, it's a joy to see them rise to that occasion.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that you had mentioned before is that you were so engaging in the classroom that the kids were watching and participating instead of acting out. That is another thing that we have noticed a lot when we talk to churches who are having discipline problems. How important is it to really make an engaging lesson to the kids, and what difference does that make with their behavior?
Oh, everything. I often joke that, Jesus was the first gospel magician.
Uh-huh.
He just didn't have to have a trick up his sleeve.
Uh-huh.
He could actually, kill a fig plant, or multiply fish, or heal people, or we have to use little gimmicks because we can't do miracles.
Uh-huh.
Uh, he taught as he walked. He fed people. He had snack time.
Uh-huh.
You he was the master teacher. Even was it Paul or Peter that someone fell out of the window and died
Oh
because
yeah.
he just taught too long. You know,
Yeah, yeah, that's pretty bad.
that's
You know you
pretty.
can't do worse than that, so at least you got
Yeah.
that.
So, we need to engage. We
Yeah,
don't use screensavers so much anymore because our technology has improved. But I like to say that kids have this internal screensaver
right.
that if you're not poking them through the senses, this
Mhm.
internal screensaver goes up, and you can't tell because it's internal. But
Right.
they're thinking about after school or a video game or who knows what, and you're looking at their eyes, but they're no longer engaging with you. So a lot of what I have on Kidology are just ways to bump them intellectually, and either by walking out among the kids, changing what you're doing. I use humor. I mean, if I think I'm losing the audience, I'll fall off my stage. And I don't literally fall to the ground,
Yeah.
but I'll be
Yeah.
standing on the edge of the stage and whoops, and I'll
Yeah.
just 2 feet down, and I've got everyone's attention again.
Yeah.
So you need to change it. I use media, and I don't ever show long videos.
Mhm.
But we use skits. I have characters come in.
Mhm.
I teach with props. I tell stories, but you just got to keep it moving. Now that takes more preparation. People who come to my children's church, comments I get all the time is that is such a production. They
Mhm.
can't. They've never seen anything like it. But it's also not smooth. We're just having fun with the kids, and I have a
Mhm.
team, and we banter back and forth. We interrupt each other. In fact, my leaders have permission. If I get to monologuing, they'll just walk right up and start the next element. So we keep each other in check because I'm a
Mhm.
storyteller and I'm a
Yeah.
talker. If you notice the kids zoning out, then cut me off because the experience of the kids is more important than my story. But yeah, we've got to keep it hopping. Kids are concrete relational. They need things that they can touch, that they can
Yeah.
experience. The three basic learning styles. It's got to be audible, it's got to be visual. They also got to get up and move. I have a cowbell on my stage, and if I ring that, the kids all have to get up and run around the room.
Oh,
We used to,
wow.
it's so important, to
Mhm.
keep the kids moving, keep them hopping, keep them guessing, change locations. I've
Mhm.
taught on the roof when I was doing the friends lowering the person through the roof. I've taken
Mhm.
class outside on the lawn, anything to shake things up, change things up.
Mhm. So do you have an idea of what you're gonna do, but you kinda take a beat on how things are going and then change it if needed as you go?
You've gotta be connected to your audience.
Okay.
I have something you'll find this on Kidology if you search for it. I call it the eyeball game. I believe strongly in making eye contact with every person in your audience as you're teaching. I do this if I'm preaching in big church. There's just something powerful about making eye contact when you're teaching. I'm working through the audience and trying to look at every child's face. You're also gauging, am I losing them? Now, you're never gonna have 100% engagement. I had one leader that was getting really frustrated with kids either sitting backwards or even walking around the room, and I had to tell him, "Look, I'm aiming for 70%. These are children." My thing is if I do look at a child who's sideways, they may still be listening, especially kids with special needs.
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't always have to have eye contact. So I look at, are they distracting another child? So if they're bothering another child, my team is trained to go in. I call it love patrol.
Mhm.
My leaders go on love patrol and see if I can do this right. The L is, are they listening? Are they observing? I think it is. The V, are they visually able to see what's going on? And then the E, are they engaged? If a child is distracting another child, then they're going to intervene. But sometimes I tell them, just check it out, because you'll be amazed. Some kid who might be, I mean, some of our special needs kids, we have a rug in the back with some Legos
Hmm.
and some whiteboards, and they can be sitting back there. And then later you can ask them what the lesson's about. They can tell you all about the lesson.
Hmm.
They didn't look like they were fully engaged, but mentally they were.
Yeah, I think that's another example of how you're meeting each student kind of where they are.
We do a
I
lot.
love
We have headphones available.
Mhm.
So if we see a child has some sensory needs, we have headphones that we put on them.
Mhm.
We have some leaders who are ready to give them one-on-one time,
Yeah.
so they can sit with them or even take them for a walk.
Hmm.
If we're doing something loud and we can see the stress, they'll say, "Hey, you want to go get a drink at the drinking fountain?" And they'll take them out of the room for that activity, without making them feel like we were taking them out of the room.
Right.
Uh, so we try to be very sensitive.
Yeah. So you also mentioned the importance of like multi-sensory teaching with the auditory, the visual, the hands-on. What are some of your favorite hands-on type of activities for the kids?
Well, I like to hand out things,
Hmm.
so I like to always have props,
Hmm.
and sometimes it's a matter of passing something out. I also like to just bring kids up. So if I'm teaching about the woman at the well, I'm gonna bring one kid up and he's gonna hold a sign that says Jerusalem, you stand there, and I know which kids to pick. And then I'll pick another kid to be Jericho, and I'll pick 4 kids to be a well, and 1 kid to be the woman. And sometimes even as I'm telling the story, because I'm trying to illustrate that most Jews would go all the way around Samaria. And so I'll walk all the way around the room, but Jesus chose to take the shortcut and met the woman at the well. So I use kids to be props all the time,
Hmm.
or just even to hold things for me. One of the gimmicks, it's a magician's gimmick. If you have a troublemaker kid in the front row, you'll pick him to be an assistant. You'll give him a silk, and you'll tell him to hold it above his head, and you don't even use him for the whole trick. He's just holding a silk, and then as his arms sag, you go higher, higher, and and the audience always love it
Uh-huh.
because you're kind of picking on the kid,
Uh-huh.
but you're also taking care of a troublemaker.
Uh-huh.
But the kid never realizes it. So excited to be up front holding the magic silk. Sometimes you can take those kids that are just kind of driving you crazy, bring
Uh-huh.
them up, have them hold a prop, you know,
Yeah.
have them keep score during a game. And so for scorekeeping, we just use rubber chickens and buckets. That kid comes up and his job when a team scores is to throw a rubber chicken in the bucket and be our
Uh-huh.
rubber chicken person. Because to sit for an hour, adults can't sit for, I
No.
always laugh at how we get annoyed at kids for not doing things that adults can't do.
Right.
Go look at big church. Are the adults on time in the sanctuary? And do they all sit down and are they all waiting and ready for the preacher? No, they're out in the lobby. The
Mhm.
service starts, they're finishing their coffee and
Right.
scrambling there. They're on their phones. And is anyone scolding them? Is anyone telling them, "Hey, close the Facebook, the pastor's preaching."
Right.
So why are we scolding the kid for being distracted when
Hmm.
his dad's doing the exact same thing? And so I get a little fired up.
Yeah.
Dad's doing the exact same thing in big church, and no one's tapping him on the knee.
Right.
It's a little hypocritical to
Yeah.
expect a child who's 11 or 7
Hmm.
be doing something that his own father is
Uh-huh.
doing in big church. So let kids be kids.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen. So speaking of kids, looking at your kidology.org, there's so many good things on there. Can you tell us about how you taught about the prophecies of Jesus?
Oh, that was fun. I bit off more than I could chew on that one too. It was Easter last year, and I've heard so many times preachers say this. I had said it many times myself that I think it's over 200 prophecies that Jesus fulfilled in his life and ministry. And that's great from apologetics point of view. I believed it was true because I've heard it so many times. And I just thought, yeah, we say that, and I don't doubt it's not true, but we kind of rattle that off, but we don't actually ever substantiate that. But obviously, it's such a big claim. What am I going to do? Go over 200 prophecies
Right.
with the children? So how do I substantiate that? Because I don't like making claims without demonstrating that it's true. But at the same time, that's pretty in the weeds. especially for children. But even as an adult, I was like, I would like to actually look into that claim that I hear all the time. So I thought, all right, I'm going to do it. I'm going to find. I think it was over 300, but I'm going to some of them get a little like, yeah, it's not untrue, but it's kind of a stretch. So I'm going to make it 200. And so I did the research. I found all the Old Testament prophecies about Jesus and then where they were fulfilled in the New Testament. I made this huge Excel doc, and which was great for personal study. I'm like, okay, how do I present this to children who have an attention span much shorter than my own? And my own can be known to be pretty short if you ask my wife.
Mhm.
So, so I decided to make trading cards, little scrolls that would have the Old Testament verse and the New Testament verse. Make all 200 of them, and then produced them, and then printed them all. But I only gave the kids maybe three or four per child, and so we passed them out. We taught as we usually did how amazing it was that Jesus fulfilled all these prophecies. And what was amazing is how many kids, because I print a ton of them, they want more than the three or five, and they're comparing with each other because they think there's doubles. I'm like, no, I've passed out to all of you, and there's no doubles. And then how many parents called me saying, "Is there any chance we could have a complete deck?
Yeah.
My kid wants them all." And I was like, "Yeah, drop by the office." And I don't give them to them cut out. I just print them a whole set. And so I ended up giving whole sets of these cards. And I had parents saying, "I've always heard that, but I've always wanted to know what are those 200
Mhm.
prophecies." And it was so cool to see how that manifests itself as a just an educational thing that even impacted parents who they wanted the full set of, it's a big stack of 200 prophecies that Jesus fulfilled.
I love that so much because I think so often what we would do is just tell the kids, hey, there's prophecies about Jesus, he fulfilled them. And that's just not that impactful at all. But you took it to this level where no one in that room is going to forget that. Like it was
Uh,
tangible in their hands.
I'll give you one more. I believe in taking object lessons to the extreme.
Uh huh.
And I love theology,
Hmm.
and I love teaching theology to kids. And I can tell you, there are definitions for theological terms that even lead pastors don't
Hmm.
bother.
Hmm.
And I'll give you one example. Mercy and grace are two words that are often used interchangeably, but they are very different.
Right.
And we use them in the same sentence. I'm so thankful for the mercy and grace that God extended to me.
Hmm.
I'll ask people all the time, do you know the difference between mercy and grace? And they usually don't.
Hmm.
And they're very different. All right. Mercy is not getting what you do deserve, and grace is getting what you don't deserve.
Right.
Even explaining that, okay, but what does that exactly mean? So what I do is I pick a game, and I pick the sweetest, cutest little girl, maybe kindergarten, and I pick like a fifth, sixth grade big boy, and I have them compete in a game. And before the game, and no one seems to notice how unfair that is, but before the game, I show a candy bar. That's the prize for winning, and then the loser, and I show a little squirt gun, but I don't say they'll win this or they'll be squirted with this. I just say the winner gets a candy bar, the loser gets squirted. And I say, do you agree? Do you agree? They both agree. They play the game. You can do any game you want, but it just needs to be to where the little girl does not have a chance to win. But they agree to it. The girl loses. So after the game is done, I say, now I was a little unclear before the game because I didn't say you'd win this candy bar. I said you'd win a candy bar, and I come out with this giant candy bar, which I give to the boy. And I say, I also didn't say you'd be squirted with this gun. I say, oh no, I give the candy bar to the boy. I said you'd be squirted. I come out with this massive super soaker from backstage.
Oh,
And the little girl, I pick one that I know won't cry,
yeah.
and so I'm ready to squirt this little girl, and she's just waiting for it. And of course, the audience is going nuts. The boys loving it, and as long as you pick a girl that won't cry, she's bracing for the squirting, but the audience is going nuts. And so then I'll to do quickly, I get to the point where the audience really wants me to show mercy to the girl
Mhm.
and not squirt her. And so I explain, okay, I'm going to show mercy to the little girl, and I'm not going to squirt her. That's what mercy is, because she
Yeah.
deserves to be squirted, because she agreed to the terms.
Mhm.
But I'm going to show mercy because, of course, I'm a nice guy. I'm not going to squirt a little girl with a super soaker, but I'm going to go even further. I'm going to show her grace. So not only am I not going to squirt her, I'm going to give her something she doesn't deserve. That's when I go backstage and I get the giant candy bar
Uh-huh.
that's bigger than what I gave the boy, and I
Uh-huh.
give her she goes home
Yeah.
with this, like three
Yeah.
foot candy bar to illustrate that Mercy was not getting what she did deserve, but Grace was actually getting, and that's what God did. We deserve to be punished for our sin,
Mhm.
but He says, "Okay, I won't do it." But then He goes a step further and says, "I'm even going to give you something
Yeah.
that you don't deserve." So that's our goal,
Mhm.
is to make it where kids can truly understand
Yeah.
even the logical definitions.
Yeah. They can understand it. They're going to remember it. And I'm guessing you're going to have a lot of people wanting to volunteer after that.
Yeah. Well, and
Uh,
that's why you don't need behavioral modification
yeah.
to get kids to pay attention to your lesson either.
Yeah. That is the truth. If you can make it interesting enough and the kids want to be paying attention, then the behaviors are not there because they're participating.
And that's why I use the making your discipline problems disappear. You
Mhm.
know, if you want discipline problems to disappear, be a good teacher.
Amen to that. Carl, can you tell us a little bit about how your faith journey has played into the ministry that you do now?
Well, I came to Christ as a little boy. I was 4 years old, and I always joke because there's a lot of debates on whether you should give candy to kids in church. Well, I was led to Christ by candy,
Mhm.
um, but not the edible type. There was a sweet little lady in my church named Candy. She'd be arrested today because every time she shook a child's hand, they got a candy in their hand. Uh, but she would always give out candy. And when my mom went into the hospital to have my sister, we farmed out the siblings, and I went to Candy's house. And I half expected her to, have a house made of candy. But I was out playing, and some little boys were picking on me, some big boys. And I remember coming in the house upset. It was over a big wheel, and I don't know if they were throwing rocks at me or something. And I expected her to comfort me. I said something to her the effect of, "I hope when I grow up, I'm not a mean boy like those boys." And you would think she would say, "Oh, Carl, you're going to be a nice boy when you grow up." But instead, she said, "Well, Carl, I don't know what kind of boy you'll be when you grow up. Those boys don't know Jesus, and that's why they're mean. You might turn out to be a nice person, but you also might turn out just like them, because what's going to determine the kind of person you are is whether you have Jesus in your heart."
Mm.
Now, I don't know if those were the exact words, but that was her message.
Mhm.
And even though I went to church and my dad was the pastor, I understood that I had to make a decision, um, what I was going to do with Jesus. So I accepted Christ as my Savior at the tender age of 4.
Wow.
I made him my bestest friend. But of course, discipleship follows that. When I was 10 years old, an evangelist came to our church. His name is Barney Kennard. He's now a good friend of mine, part of Kidology. He leads our coaching ministry. He did a 5-day event, did some magic tricks that I figured out and back home, and was inspired by his ventriloquism, and I wanted to do puppetry. But the last day of the event, when he did the invitation, I was frustrated because when he did the gospel presentation, I had done that 6 years ago. I was, a veteran of the faith. So when those kids all went forward to receive Christ and get saved, I knew that wasn't for me. The next invitation was for a rededication, which I also didn't think fit, because that was for kids that maybe were a Christian but not really living for Christ, and I felt like I was doing my best. So I was ready for the third invitation. There wasn't a third. So in that final invitation, I remember just praying something to the effect of, "I want to do what he does when I grow up."
Mm.
So when I got home that night and my mom was trying to pry out of her little boy what God did in his heart, I expressed something to that effect to my mom. And my mom said, "That's wonderful. You start this Wednesday." And I've always joked that, good mothers would say, "Oh, that's wonderful if you do that someday," but not my mom. She said, "You start this Wednesday." And I said, "This Wednesday?" I said, "When I grow up, I want to be a children's evangelist." And I remember her saying, "If God's called you into children's ministry, then what's grown up got to do with anything?" So
Right.
she coached me through taking one of my magic tricks and putting a message to it. We went to the thrift store and she bought me my first puppet. I still have it.
Mhm.
Our club leader's name was Jerry Hinkle. So my dad came up with the idea of naming my puppet Harry Jinkle, switching the first consonants. So I welcomed the kids with a puppet, and I taught the council time with my mom's coaching. And so really, I often when people ask me how long I've been in kids ministry, I subtract 10 from my age, and that's how long I've been in kids ministry. Eventually, it became my job. So that led me into kids ministry. But the other experience I think that gives me a real love and heart for kids had to do just leaning back to kids with special needs was how my special need was discovered. If I can share that story.
Yeah,
Uh,
please do.
I'm completely deaf in my left ear,
Mhm.
and that was not discovered until second grade. When they used to test back then, they would take you into the public school room, they'd put headphones on you, and they'd say, if you hear a tone in your right ear, raise your right hand. If you hear it in your left ear, raise your left hand. But to a kid, it was a test,
Mhm.
and you want to pass a test. So if I heard in my right ear, I'd raise my right hand. If they said, where's the sound, and I heard nothing, I'd raise my left hand. So you didn't think of it as cheating. You thought of it as passing. And
Right.
so I kept passing the hearing test. And so by fate, I always sat in the back right corner of my classroom, just where I like to sit. And so my deaf ear was toward the classroom. And so I struggled with hearing. And so my teacher, I didn't always hear what she said. So I'm a talker. So I got in trouble for talking a lot anyway. But then if I asked my friends, what did she say? I would get in trouble for talking. So I started looking to see what my friends were doing, and I'd get in trouble for cheating. And so one fateful day, my teacher got upset at me because then I talked back saying that I wasn't cheating and I didn't hear her. So I had to put my name on the board. So I went up and put my name on the board, which meant 5 minutes after school detention. And I wrote it with some attitude, as you can imagine. And my attitude was not acceptable. So she said, put a check after your name, which was another 5 minutes. So I wrote the check with some attitude, and that did not go over well. So she said, put another check after your name. So I did that with a lot of attitude. And after that, she said, put another check mark after your name. Well, after several check marks written with attitude, I turned around and my fateful words were, I might as well fill the whole stupid board, which, of course, stupid was a swear word.
Mhm.
You're in second grade. So she said, please do. So I remember being up there, embarrassed, crying, filling the whole board with checks, spacing them out
Yeah.
because I really believed each one was 5 minutes after school. So after school, believing I'd be there till nightfall, she sat me down and I pleaded my case again. And her words to me were, what, are you deaf or what?
Wow.
So I took that as an insult. I
Wow.
think she was just trying to understand me. I don't think she meant to be mean.
Yeah.
I think she just was fed up and exasperated with me. So I went home and told my parents that my teacher called me deaf.
Mhm.
Well, I think my parents were like, that would actually explain a lot. They did some more professional testing, discovered that, moved me to the front left of the room. My grades began to improve, but I still struggled with rhyming words,
Mhm.
which is why I do a lot of poetry and things easily now because I repeated second grade,
Mhm.
was drilled in rhyming words. But then I dealt with the humiliation of flunking second grade
Mhm.
to all my peers.
Mhm.
So whenever I meet a second grader now, I always say, "Oh, I spent two of the happiest years of my life in the second grade," but
Uh-huh.
they actually weren't very happy. Luckily, in third grade, we moved across the country, and I was able to start fresh with none of my peers knowing that I had repeated. When my parents announced we were moving to a new state, my siblings were very upset. I was ecstatic
Mhm.
because I was able to hide, that, and I got out of the "you flunked second grade, you're a dummy" stuff. So I'm very sympathetic to kids feeling mislabeled, being told they're dumb, feeling
Mhm.
dumb. So my heart just because I lived it. I lived
Yeah.
the everyone thinks I'm being disobedient. They think I'm dumb. They think I'm goofing off. And I'm sincerely trying to please everyone in my life, and
Mm.
I can't please anybody. Um, And I think my mom profoundly changed at that point too. I mean, I don't remember it a lot, but I do think that was a profound impact on my mom. Like, okay, he's been trying,
Mhm.
and he had a sincere handicap,
Mhm.
that that was hidden. My teacher, I still remember her crying and hugging me and apologizing, so she felt very bad. So I just have a heart for kids. In fact, I'll tell you, last year we had a new family come to our church with 2 boys with special needs, just behavioral. They visit our church and they come to my kids' church. I can tell right away. After church, the dad came to me and I could tell he was braced. And he said, "How are my boys?" I said, "They were great." I was fibbing a little.
Mhm.
"Really?" I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Really?" I said, "That's why we have children's church. So you can go to church
Mhm.
and the kids can go to church." And he
Mhm.
goes, and he kept asking me, I said, "When are you going to get the hint? I'm not going to tell you anything more than they were great." I
Mhm.
said, "This is children's church and we love children." So
Mhm.
I said, "You go to church and let your boys go to church and
Mhm.
never ask me again how their behavior was, ever." I
Mhm.
said, "If they ever do something like mean
Mhm.
or they break anything or they hurt someone, I'll let you know.
Mhm.
But if they just," and I said their names, "if they're just Billy and Bob coming to church, I'm not going to tell you a thing." He cried.
I bet.
He
I bet
cried,
it did.
and he said, "This is my church."
Yeah.
Because they weren't bad.
No.
They weren't being bad. They were being 2 boys.
Yeah.
They were me.
Yeah. Your story is so important because it's so many people's story. I mean, other people in my life that I highly respect and care about, super successful people that, like you, had hidden disabilities and had to repeat grades in elementary school and carried that shame around with them and the mislabels for years. And this is why we do what we do. What I do with Wonderful Works and what you do with pouring into the hearts of kids, that kids need to hear when they're struggling. I see you. I see what you're worth. I see what you're good at. And you are to be celebrated. And it makes such a difference. I mean, to
Yeah.
the kids and to those parents. I'm not surprised at all that dad started crying. He's probably expecting to hear bad things when he picks up his kids, and his heart was probably in his throat when he came to talk to you. What a
Yeah. But
gift you gave him.
here we go again. And I don't know, are we the 6th church they visited?
Mm-hmm.
You know and I go, and the other part of me goes, "I had his boys for 1 hour."
Mm-hmm.
He has his boys every day, all
Mm-hmm.
day, and I can't handle them for 1 hour? Good grief. What am I complaining about?
Mm-hmm.
You know? So, have a little compassion,
Mm-hmm. Have a
you
little
know?
mercy and grace.
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah. Gosh, thank you so much for sharing that story. I know there's someone out there listening that needs to hear that today. If
Thanks.
there is one thing that you could leave with parents or with ministry leaders who are listening today, what is it you want to leave with them?
Just to have a long range view of a kingdom perspective of the kids in your ministry. There's a Sunday school teacher that many have never heard of. His name is Edward Kimball. I don't know if you know his story, but Edward Kimball was a teacher back in the late 1800s. And he, we don't have any pictures of him. Nobody knows what he looked like, but he had a passion that every one of his students would know Christ.
Mhm.
And so much so that one of his students didn't speak well, wasn't educated, his attendance was terrible, but he was determined that he would at least share the gospel with him. They didn't have child labor laws back then, so he tracked this kid down to a store that he worked in on his lunch break, and he shared the gospel with him and led him to Christ. And he had written in his journal, "Of all my students, Dwight shows the least potential for the kingdom of God."
Mm.
That Dwight is D.L. Moody.
Wow. Wow.
Dwight
Wow.
was friends with Marshall Fields.
Mhm.
Marshall Fields wanted to grow up to be wanted to run a store.
Mhm.
Dwight wanted to run a wanted to grow up to run a shoe empire.
Mm-hmm.
He was working in a shoe store. We might all be wearing Moody shoes and shopping at Marshall Fields. Marshall Fields went on to success. D.L. Moody became a great evangelist.
Yeah.
He founded the Moody Bible Institute, where I went to school,
Mm-hmm.
and countless other things. Most people know who D.L. Moody is. If you don't, he's the Billy Graham of a century before.
Mm-hmm.
Early on in the 50s at Moody, they used to have a program called PCW. It was their practical work assignment. Now they call it PCM, practical ministry assignments.
Mm-hmm.
But one of their PCW students was assigned to an inner city school where they divided the kids up by boys and girls in grades. And one of their students' name was Jerry, and he was assigned, he ended up with just one student, a little girl named Patty. And she had never heard the gospel. She was very poor. Her father had committed suicide, hung himself when she was 12 years old. She was living above a store with a single mom with two siblings. And she just loved Jerry, loved what he came and taught her. And at the end of that first hour with Jerry, the leader pulled Jerry aside behind a curtain, but he didn't know that this little girl could hear. And the leader wasn't bad what he said, but he said, "Hey, I noticed you only have one student. If you'd like, we can put her in another class and we can call Moody Bible Institute and we can get you reassigned to a better assignment." And she heard this and was thinking, no, 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 no. I want to keep learning from him. And he heard this boy say, "No, I'll come every week. I don't care if it's just for this one little girl."
Mm-hmm.
And he did. He came every week, shared the Bible with her, and led her to Christ. Patty grew up, went to Moody Bible Institute because of him, and there she met my dad.
Oh, wow.
And now I'm here.
Wow. Wow.
So I think back to Edward Kimball,
Mm.
who said, "Of all my students, Dwight has the least potential for the kingdom of God."
Mm-hmm.
And the great evangelist D.L. Moody was born.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a student named Jerry who said, "I don't care if it's one student. I'll come every week, even if it's just for her."
Mm-hmm.
And then she went to Moody, married my dad.
Mm-hmm.
And I think of the ministry I've been able to have and the people I've been able to minister to. And it all goes back to two teachers of children
Yeah.
who valued one student.
Yes.
So don't think about the size of your ministry, the influence you have. We live in a society that cares about likes and hearts and
Mm-hmm.
followers and websites. I don't care about the size of Kidology. I don't care about the breadth of my ministry, the scope. I don't even look at my stats. I don't care about stats.
Mm-hmm.
I care about the kids that God brings into my church on Sunday. And I look out with my eyeball game. I look at every child and I say, is there one kid here today that I need to love on, that I need to notice, that I need to speak truth into, that I need to share the gospel to, that I need to say, you matter to God, you matter to me, and you have a future. Don't give up on yourself, because I don't know who that child's going to become, because their influence on the world and the kingdom may be bigger than anything I could ever do. So that would be my message. Focus on the individual children that God brings into your life.
Mm-hmm.
Is that's who matters the most.
So powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that. I really didn't think you could make the story even better after you said Dwight was D.L. Moody, but somehow you did. That
Well,
was
it's the truth.
amazing. That was amazing just to see how God works the tapestry of people's lives together. And here we are today. And Karl, everything you have shared today this is going to change some people's lives. I really believe it is. I believe there will be people listening to this who are going to leave this going on Sunday into their children's ministry with a brand new perspective of seeing those kids who struggle or maybe they misunderstand, and lives are going to be different. So thank you, thank you, thank you for being on our show today. We just so grateful to hear from you.
Thank you so much.
To learn more from Karl, please visit kidology.org. And don't forget, if you like this podcast, please follow and share with others. See you next time.